Hello, and welcome to the SharePoint Framework and JavaScript Special Interest Group biweekly meeting. It is August 3rd, 2017. Got a good meeting today, a couple of cool demos. We'll talk about those in a second. But real quick, for those that might be new to the call or new to listening to these recordings, I did want to give you a quick rundown of what this meeting is all about, what this reoccurrent, community gathering is really all about. And so this is a place for folks who are interested in SharePoint development, and more specifically SharePoint client-side development, to come together and talk about the new SharePoint framework and the implications there, the updates around that, as well as building this JavaScript Core component, which we've been working on here in the Patterns and Practices group. So we are part of the larger SharePoint Patterns and Practices program, and we started out over a year ago now, which is kind of crazy, with these special interest groups to allow folks to have a little bit better focus on topic areas. So this one is about client-side JavaScript development, TypeScript development. We have ones for PowerShell, and we have ones for the core component as well. You're, of course, welcome to please join as many of these special interest groups as you would like. It's a great way to get a little bit more focused information. The monthly calls are a lot broader in scope, so it's good to get into these the special interest groups if you do have some interest in those particular categories. So two links down there at the bottom, the aka.ms sppnp-community is the shortcut to the Microsoft Tech community. And that is a great place to ask general questions, not just about client-side development, but about SharePoint development all up. So that's a really great place, and that's community. So you'll get answers from Microsoft folks, answers from other folks in the community. That's a really great resource. Encourage you to check that out. The second link there, dev.office.com/SharePoint, is your one-stop shop for all things SharePoint development. So if you're ready to get started on the SharePoint framework and start learning about that, we've got tutorials and walkthroughs on SharePoint framework. If you need resources on add-in development or the WSP package development, solution development, all of that is at or moving to dev.office.com/SharePoint. So check that out. It's a great resource. And of course, we're always looking to update that. So if you see big gaps in documentation and things like that, always great feedback for us to hear. So just a reminder, obviously the folks on the call have updated their invite because you're here, but this is more for the folks that might be watching this on the recording. Do please update your invite to aka.ms SPPNP JS SIG call. It's actually the same link. We've updated the calendar invite behind this link. So do download the new calendar update. This is Microsoft's fiscal year ends in June, and so we have a new calendar invite starts in July. And so I know it's the summer, so folks are coming and going, so we're going to try and advertise this out as much as we can. If you're talking to your friends, or if you see out in the world somebody saying, well, what happened to that meeting? Why is that meeting not happening anymore? It definitely is, and please just point them to this link and ask them to update their calendar entry. So just a reminder, we'll probably do this one more time, and that will, hopefully folks will get this update. I know lots of folks are out on vacation. Summer's always kind of a downtime. The monthly invite link should be there on the Patterns and Practices homepage, Tim. If it's not updated, it will be, Vesa has been out on vacation, so it will be updated when he gets back if it is not updated now. So that those things are going to pick, okay. If it's not updated now, that will be updated. That stuff's going to pick back up. I believe we're targeting late August, and then for sure, what's the month after August? September. So September for sure, all the normal meetings will be picking up. Things during the summer kind of go a little bit on hiatus as folks are on vacation and things like that. So agenda for today, we've got a short update on the JavaScript Core component. We've got two great demos. Sergei is going to talk about so last time I thought he was going to talk about this, but this time for sure he's going to talk about this. I finally got my dates correct. He did this really awesome pull request for this new configure method in the JavaScript Core library. So he's going to talk through that and do some cool demos there. And then Sebastian has, I called it just Angular 4 in SPFx. I hope that's a good enough title, but he's going to show us some really cool work he's been doing around Angular 4 in SPFX and sort of bootstrapping that and getting that going. So really cool stuff. Excited to see both of those coming up. And then we should have a little bit of time at the end for an open discussion. Real quick, I did want to do a Patrick update. So this is me. I am actually out on family leave right now. So we have just had our first child. So my wife and I are very excited and very tired. So if I sound a little tired on this call, please forgive me. But what that's going to mean in terms of me being on family leave is I'm going to have personally some reduced activity in the repo on Gitter and all the other channels out there. Thanks, guys. I appreciate all the congratulations. But you're going to see me not as active as normal, and this is why. So I am out on family leave. I am trying to be somewhat active. I'm trying to respond to issues and answer questions as best I can, but that's going to be slower than it has been in the past. The monthly releases, however, we are going to continue those. The next one I think is targeted for August 15th, I want to say. But we will continue the monthly releases of the JavaScript Core library. Sort of a note there, if you've got something that you really need to see fixed or an enhancement you really want to see added, the quickest way, at least for the next few months, to get that in there would be to do a pull request and get that submitted, and we can take a look and get that merged. And I say that not because I don't want to do the things, but because I've got some other stuff going on right now, but don't want to neglect this. So we will be doing the monthly releases. I will try and be sort of active, but it will be at a reduced rate. So just ask that you folks are sort of a little understanding on that, and I promise to get back to it full speed once I'm back from leave. So just a quick update for me. Wanted to share some stuff that's been going on. And again, thanks to everybody for the congrats. And yeah, Bill, I'm mostly asleep most of the time now. So still want to remind everybody the great opportunities to participate in this SIG, as well as these are kind of just good opportunities to participate in the Patterns and Practices program overall. So you can demo a SharePoint Framework web part. So if you're doing some cool work or got a cool project going on, let us know, get on this call, demo it for the community. It's a great way, one, to show off your work, and two, pardon me, for all of us to learn from what you've done and the work you're doing. I constantly see folks doing stuff with SharePoint Framework and client-side development that I would maybe never have thought of, so it's really neat to learn from everybody. I think that's one of the more valuable aspects of these meetings. Demo something around the JavaScript core library. Maybe that's something in Node. Maybe that's something in SharePoint Framework. Maybe it's something just in general client-side development. Contribute on GitHub. So this would be issues. This submitting issues. This would be submitting pull requests. This would be just answering other folks' questions on GitHub. Questions come up. Folks jump in and answer. And thanks to everybody that's been doing some of that. Really appreciate a little bit of help there on the coverage. And then, of course, providing feedback. So whether that's issues in the issues list or just general feedback on the SharePoint Framework, the JavaScript core library, these calls, etc. So feedback kind of on everything we're doing is always welcome. As I said before, I can't promise we'll instantly react to that feedback, but we do take it to heart and we do think about it and look to improve all of the things we're doing in our portfolio. So keep that great feedback coming. So real quick update on the JavaScript core component. As I've been out, not a lot of big stuff has happened on this, but did want to say to folks I am looking at the issues. I'm trying to work through those as best I can and as best I have time. But do again want to encourage folks, if you've got the time and you see something you really want to get fixed or really want an enhancement added, something like that, do encourage you to put together a pull request and get that submitted. We'll definitely review that and take a look. As always, if your idea is large in scope, and is going to encompass kind of a lot of change to the library, would just ask, reach out first. Would love to have a chat with you about it before maybe you put in all that work. because either it might be something we won't be able to merge or something other folks might be working on, something like that. So just if it's a huge PR, just reach out first before you do a ton of work, because we want to make sure folks aren't wasting their time. But do encourage you to put that work in if you'd like, and reach out. Would love to have those pull requests. So like I said, super quick update on the JavaScript core library today. And now right on to the demos. So I see Sergei is on the call. You're up first, mostly because I put your name on the slide first. So if you're there and ready to go.
Yep. Hi. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Patrick. Let me share my screen. Please tell me if you can see something.
Loading for me. All right, I've got it.
Okay. So, quick introduction. My name is Sergei Sergeyev. I'm SharePoint and Office 365 developer and consultant. I live in Minsk, Belarus, and I have been working with SharePoint for more than 7 years. Also, in April, I received MVP award from Microsoft, and I just want to say thank you again to Microsoft for recognition and to the great community, because I strongly believe this is something which is not possible without community. Okay, on today's demo, I'm going to show a new method in PNPG's core library called configure. So let's go ahead. First of all, let me explain my issue and why configure method is very useful in my case. I'm building Node.js web application with Express. Express is a framework for building web applications in Node.js environment. In a nutshell, that's simply a Node.js module, and you need to configure and set up this module appropriately in order to run web server. And web applications in Node.js are different from what we all know from, for example, iOS web application. Because in the web app running on Node.js, there is only one single thread. There is no thread pool or multi-process or something, simply one single thread. And that means that all global variables are shared between requests. And that's one thing. And another thing is how module import works in Node.js. For example, when you are requiring any module in Node.js, for example, requiring or importing like import PNPGs, you always receive exactly the same instance, or in other words, you receive exactly the same reference. And that's also very important. Now let's take a look at the code. I'm not going to dive into Express framework internals. Just want to show you some of the routes. For example, this is list route. It is very similar to MVC controller actually. So there are two routes, one for get request and one for post request. Get request simply returns a view, and post request creates just a small item in a list. Let me run it. Let me make it a little bit bigger. Okay, so I'm hitting a 5. Okay, it is generating token. Now let me navigate to create, and let's check first our list. It is empty. Now let's hit create new item. So item created. Now let's refresh again, and you see the new item. And the item created by Express.js admin on behalf of me. So the code. The code is pretty simple. Also, it is similar to .NET SharePoint context. In this line, I'm creating a context, and then I'm generating access token, user access token for SP host. Then I'm using global PNP setup function here. I'm setting authorization header as well as base URL for SP host. And then I'm just using regular PNP.js core code for creating a new item. So in general, nothing special, and you see that it works. But actually, there is an issue here. And the issue becomes clear in multi-user scenario. Because as I described before, there is only one thread, and for all users, this PNP variable, which is imported right here, is the same, actually the same reference. And for example, imagine a situation when you have 10 or 20 or even more users simultaneously trying to access your root and running multiple asynchronous queries against SharePoint REST API. In this case, there is a big chance that one user will change this global authorization header via global PNP setup function, and another one will pick up this new header and will use this header for his request. And for sure, this is not something we are expecting from our app, because this is wrong. Every user should use his own authorization header and access token. And that is why, ideally, it is much better to have some kind of local PNP variable for every user with appropriate authorization header. And this is the case when configure method can help us. So instead of global setup, we can now write something like let it be sp pnp.sp.configure. Configure accepts two parameters. One is options object. You can pass in headers, cache, credentials, and mode properties. So I'm interested in headers, and I actually need to set authorization header. And the second argument is my base URL, so I'm just going to copy host URL here. And I need to fix this part to be just SP, to use my just created variable. So basically this is it. Let me rerun it once again. So you see it also works, but in this case we are not having this multi-user issue anymore, and we can safely use our SP variable, which are bound to a specific user. Of course, you will never see this issue when using PNP.js Core from, for example, from client or from browser, right? But there are some cases when you still can use configure method, and configure method might be helpful for you. For example, SharePoint REST API supports JSON Lite, and you can configure your application to use no metadata header for some requests in order to reduce traffic and use full metadata for others. For example, I have also an index route here. And just for demonstration purposes, I can query list items using different metadata settings. sp.web.lists, get by title. It's my test list. .items, and you see that configure also available on items level. Actually, configure method added to base queryable queryable class. That is why configure method is also available on almost on every object in PinPG's core, like web lists, items, fields, etc., and also on collections. So I'm using configure. I want to set headers, and I want to set, let me just copy, to set no metadata for this request. And let me copy paste another one, exactly the same, except for second one, I set up of data verbose. And let's just print it. Items and items 2. Index root working when you are accessing the home page of the app, of the application. So now I should see my objects. The first one, oh, sorry, I missed one part, of course, get. Let me refresh once again. Oh, sorry, I need to rerun it actually. Okay, and now, yes. So the first one is null metadata. And we see that only important properties are returned from SharePoint. And for the second request, a lot of additional properties, navigation properties, metadata, etc., because of data verbose. So basically, this is it. This is all you can do with configure method. Let me check if you have any questions. Nope. Okay, so thank you.
Thanks, Sergei. It's I think it's a really great addition to the library. Sebastian, if you want to jump on there. It's going to provide a lot of flexibility to folks, and it's composable as well. So if you do a configure, you can kind of create your own root object, and then later you could do subsequent configures to modify even that object slightly. So it provides a lot of additional flexibility we didn't have in the library before. So I think great to get that in there and great to see that. So thanks, Sergei, for that. Great work on that. I think it's really, really cool. So Sebastian, it looks like you are taking over. Perfect timing.
I do.
All right. So I see it on my screen.
Excellent. So let's start it off. So it's been a couple of crazy weeks for me in the last month or so where we've been working kind of a lot on making Angular and just SharePoint framework work together. I've been an Angular developer for a long time now, and I was kind of sad that I could not make it work using Angular 4 or Angular 2 or whatever the version of Angular you're using. So I really wanted to go through this entire process and start understanding what is required by the SharePoint framework to make work Angular inside any modern pages or any classic pages in SharePoint. So I've been working with some kind of a startup project, and Microsoft through the SharePoint, where there you go, inside the SharePoint SPFx web parts, there was one thing that started to use, which was that Angular Angular 2 prototype that was actually done. I think that's by you, Sergei, if I can. I think that's it. And it was like, that is a very, very good start. It kind of worked, but didn't allow everything to be included in there. So for example, routing and providers and all the different concepts and components that Angular provides. So I kind of started with that project and used that as a starting point for understanding better how we can make things work with Angular. And the thing that was extremely important for me was two different things. First, we want to be able to add as many Angular web parts as possible on the same page, meaning that all the different Angular web parts will have their own configuration and their own life cycle, so there's no collision anywhere. But also we wanted to make sure that we can also put on the same page multiple web parts from multiple projects. So within different developers are working on the same kind of technology stack, but on different projects or different companies, if they both put their web parts on the same page, we want to make sure that everything works. So I've come up with fixed some of those challenges, and I came up with something called the SPFx Angular boilerplate. I'll work with Vista to try to make that happen inside the PNPFX samples web part, where we actually cover all the different aspects I just talked about. So multiple web parts, multiple Angular versions, multiple projects and everything. So before we go any further, I'd like to show you actually what is happening. So let's go here. Let's go just do a gulp serve. And let's wait for our local workspace to pop up. In that scenario, we've been working hard to make sure that we're using the best concepts and also best practices in web dev. So using simple components, I'll show the code right after. Using simple components, mock objects for local development, real data using PNP.js Core for hosted development and everything. So let me show you what this is all about. Actually pretty simple. So I'm adding a new web part, go here, click on that basic Angular, and then I have a web part. It is a boring web part. There's nothing sexy in there, but still it all supports anything you would expect. So if you want to loop in, for example, Angular material to it also it works extremely well. So it all supports all the kind of Angular stuff that works natively. And here, as you can see, you can go in, edit your web part, and say that the basic Angular is pretty awesome. And you can see that you have that reactive property pane that communicates back to your Angular application, updates your properties, and then sends all those properties to a service inside your Angular app. So that's pretty cool. And here, if I do whatever, because I'm a local workbench, it's just gonna pop up a list of mocked data right here because I'm in the local workbench. That also works if I do add multiple web parts. I can go here and actually add multiple web parts. So now I have two different set of configurations. So I can come here, go in there and say hello, and I have another list name which will be whatever, and then I will see the content coming up. So both of my web parts have actually different settings, different configuration. That was one of my goals, to make sure that this happens and that the speed and performance of those web parts is actually not altered by anything around the SharePoint framework. Same thing will also happen if we're going here and we'll just reload our hosted workbench. Can go here, add the basic Angular part. That's funny. That's interesting. Let me just do that again. There's no web part and there's an error. That's kind of interesting. I'll come back to, oh, there you go. If I do that, well, I have a technical error. Let's see that later on. I'll just make that happen for now. So let's go back and see what the code is all about. So I had to do a bunch of, not changes, but ways of working that will permit the SPFx to work on any type of Angular version. So first thing you have to do, that is a classic. You need to go in, you need to add all of your Angular references. So all your packages that you want to use. In that case, we're using Angular 4.3.1. It's actually now updated to 4.3.2. So depending on your scenarios, that would work. You also need to import Core.js. It will polyfill some of the ES6 elements in there. You also need the reflect metadata, which is a Angular dependency, RxJS, if you want to use the reactive extensions for JavaScript inside your Angular stuff. It's kind of built in now. System.js and Zone.js. So all of those different aspects needs to be loaded, npm install that, and that's pretty much it. So you want to have everything loaded inside your SharePoint Framework web part. Nothing will be hosted by Microsoft. You will be hosting all of those different files or different packages within your own Webpack bundle. One of the hacks or one of the ways we fixed one of our problems was that Angular is supposed or is meant to be a single page application framework. So it's not made initially to work as a web part or component base that are all mixed on inside the same page. So we had to make sure that the Zone.js was actually loaded only once for any page, no matter how many web parts are on the page that are using Angular. If there's only one, I can bundle that directly in my package. I don't really care. But if I have two, then there's some conflicts that will happen. So what I'm doing, I'm in the config, can go here, in the config.json, I can go and have the externals. So I will externalize my Zone.js using a CDN. So everyone that will be using Zone.js will actually be pointing to the same CDN. The way Webpack works, if the CDN resource is already loaded, it will not load it again. That means that you will always only have one Zone.js loaded, only a single instance of it, and that single instance will be able to manage multiple Angular modules. That means that if you put on a screen any types of web parts that are using Angular, you'll be in a good position using that approach. So that's the first thing you need to do. You need to externalize your Zone.js. Then afterwards, in terms of packaging, you'll have some challenges where SharePoint Framework will complain about some of the references not being set or some collision between Angular and some of the internals of the SharePoint Framework. So what you need to do is that in the TS config, you need to make sure that you're skipping your libraries. So you don't need to check your pre-bundle libraries. So TypeScript will not try to bundle them again. It will just assume that all those libraries are actually working, and it will just bundle everything together. That will fix some of those challenges. And the second challenge is that Angular 4 currently has a bug. Depending on the structure of your files when you're developing, and because everything is in the source file of our web part, you need inside the gulp file.js, you need to instruct what's the actual source repository for the Angular core. So where it's going to be, what's your entry point for your Angular code into your source file, so it will automatically match that with your Angular core module. So you just need to put that directly into your gulp file. So it's going to add a new Webpack module, Webpack plugins, excuse me, in your pipeline. So it's going to automatically, every time you will run gulp serve, when it's going to come to Webpack, it's going to pre-configure Webpack with that plugin. Everything will work, and that is it. Those are the only structural changes that needs to happen before you can run any of your Angular web part. Afterwards, the only thing you need to do is to actually code your web part the exact same way that you would do it. So I will show you our components that we're using. So for example, I have a basic Angular in where I have an app. I have a home component and a list component. In my home component is, as you can see, that type of code is 100% Angular compatible. That is Angular code. There's no SharePoint Framework code in there. There's absolutely nothing that are actually talking with the SharePoint Framework. It's just a component that will be bundled through an Angular module or an Angular application. So you can use everything you would expect from Angular. So you can inject your services, you can use metadata to declare your components and everything. So nothing too fancy. Same thing for the list. So we'll just show you the template. So for example, the template is a fairly simple template where I just show the home component and the title. The title is what is being sent out by the property pane of our Angular web part. And here I have a list element that refers to the list component, as I already registered my list to use that selector right here. And here, for example, I can still use everything that you would expect from Angular. So I can use all the events. So I can implement on init and override the ng on init. So when the web part is actually loaded and ready to render, I can invoke a service call. Those service call are Angular services that I can get. So I get the instance of the service. I get the items based on the configuration service, which is a service that is shared amongst all my different components. That is actually pretty much a set of data that is coming from that property pane from SharePoint Framework. So the list name that I've put in will be used here. So I'll use that method, and when there's something that comes up, I will just assign my items to the items, and then I will be able to go in my list template and do an ng4 for all the items that are available, just display the ID and the title. So those are really Angular concept. Nothing too fancy here, out of the box Angular stuff. Now we need to be able to use those two components that are tightly coupled, well, not tightly coupled, but are included one inside each other. So you have the home component that is the top component, and inside that I'm using the list component. Well, I need to use in my web part, I'll just close that app. I have my basic Angular web part.ts, so that doesn't change. I'm still using the exact same the exact same set of files. But here the big difference is that I'm actually not iterating from the base client web part, but I'm iterating from the base Angular web part. And the base Angular web part is a specialized version of the client web part that I built. That is what is coming from, well, the base is coming from that Microsoft project that we use as our base, and then we enhanced it to build it to be a more performant and that works better with all the different components of Angular. So you iterate from it, and the only thing you have to instruct your abstract class is what is going to be your root component. So you're going to have an app component that's going to wrap everything. Afterwards, what are going to be your different subcomponents? So what are you going to use? So it's going to make sure that it bundles everything together inside your SharePoint Framework project. What are your different routes? So you can, everything is based out of routes instead of direct components. That way we can really decouple our components from our SharePoint Framework code. So it's extremely important to have that. And then I'll come back to the providers as I want to show you the routes or the routes right here. So I can go here, and I can see that when I'm at the slash, and when there's nothing, I just load the home component. That also means that you will be able to use different routes and subroutes to be able to navigate from one component to the other. So the same way you would go from a slash user slash ID of the user, or slash user slash ID slash details, for example, where you want to navigate through your different components like you would do in any Angular application. That is absolutely possible to do it that way. Keep in mind that if you're doing that and you're using the URL, all of your different components will be kind of mixed up because everyone will still look at the URL. So that will not be a great way to navigate through the URL. But in Angular, you can also actually use the exact same strategy, but the state or the navigation states or the navigation routes are kept in a local state. So you can navigate from one state to the other using the slash, but it's not going to be replicated to the URL. So at least you'll be able to use multiple web parts at the same time with multiple sub-routing systems without any problems. And here I just exported that app routes using that in my routes here. And the last one is this one. So the providers, this is where, that's kind of our ng start or app start in Angular, where we do some kind of a pre-initialization before we can go and deploy and run our code. So what we're doing here, we're building two sets of provider based on the environment. So if you're local, we're actually providing a mocked version of the item service. And if we're hosted in the classic SharePoint experience or in the regular SharePoint, we're doing that right here. So for example, if I'm local, I need to have a configuration service that I will configure using those different types. So if I'm using the item service, just replace that by using the mock item service. Here I can actually initialize some of those values, so I can use the properties passed by my property pane and automatically put that right inside my configuration service that will hold all that data. And because that service will be shared amongst all of my different components, if I inject the service inside any of the components, I'll be able to use the configuration elements that were set up using the property pane. So that's pretty cool. Same thing here, I'm doing the exact same thing. The only difference is this one, as I want to use the item service when I'm using the item service. So I can just use the out-of-the-box item service that uses real SharePoint data using PNP.js. So I will just show you right now. So in my shared components, I will have a service including that item service. So extremely simple. Nothing fancy here. Just a simple await on a PNP SP web list, get by title based on the title, the list name that is provided through the pane. Item get as does automatically the map to my custom object, returns that. Same thing if I'm showing you the mock version of it. I'm doing the exact same thing, just that I'm creating the data instead of just using connected data. So those two are the way that we can pass the data, and that's it. As you can see, you don't see any render method or any magic happening. So how the magic is actually happening is through that base class that happens in our core. So you have a base Angular web part. And this is where pretty much everything happens. So you have the base Angular web part that extends the base client-side web parts. And there's really three different methods that are important in here. First one, this one, the render. So I'm actually assigning the inner HTML of that element to be a dynamic Angular dash instance ID of the web part. So any new web part will have a separate instance ID. That means that all my web parts will be able to be rendered dynamically based on that. No one will collide. Each one will have its own set of properties, configuration, and all of that. Then I'm bootstrapping the module. So here is where we do that dynamic bootstrapping using the platform browser dynamic. So that is one of the module that is provided by Angular. And here I can just bootstrap a module and then assign what will be the reference to the ng module ref. This is where, this is what we use the most from that Angular 2 prototype from Microsoft. So this is really what they came up with for that prototype. So we use that as a fairly simple way to bootstrap the entire app based on that dynamic bootstrapping. And I also have that get module. And that get module is where we actually create our app module. So here you can see we're creating an ng module with a bunch of imports, declaration, bootstrap, exports, provider, and those are all different properties and variables that are or created through that base Angular web part, or that are being specified by our specific web parts we're creating. And then I can use, for example, the routes from this, the declarations, the component, and the provider that we're use as a property on my instance web part, in that case, my basic Angular web part. Then there's one last piece where we need to bootstrap everything inside an app. And that app component is actually a very, very, very simple component where there's only one line in our template, and the one line is a router outlet. That router outlet would allow us to put in any other component that's going to automatically decouple the specific Angular code attached to the SharePoint framework to regular Angular code. So you can see here in my app, I have my app.component, and that's it. As you can see, I have my Angular -selector ID, so I can create that same instance ID, so it's going to attach to that element, and I will only output a router outlet, and then all of the other components will be positioned in that router outlet based on the state and based on the different set of routes that we're using. And then afterwards, when I run everything, just logically gets there, then I'll just try to make it happen again and see if there's not something that breaks. I don't know why it's breaking. Let me just, I don't know, reload that page or just go back. No, that's not what I want. Go back here, reload that. I don't know why it's actually working here and not working in the hosted workbench. That's kind of very, very weird. So I don't know why. Anyway, I'll make sure that this is not breaking for anyone. Usually it should not. So here I would just connect to my data when I specify the list name, and afterwards we're actually good to go. And it just connects to everything. So if I can show it right here, you will have one app component in where you will have a home component that actually only has the home component and the title, in where you have the list component, so it's rendering the list name content plus the set of data that is being fetched by SharePoint or by that mocked object. The cool thing is that this would work with any type of components, any type of Angular applications you already did. I see a question now in the window, does it work with Angular CLI and generated components and services? This is something I need to work on. I would say yes, but I haven't tested it enough to assure that it would work. It would work. It will not work using ngserve though. So we'll need, unless we can override what ngserve does. So ngCLI could work as we're just setting up stuff and just creates everything together and put the files in there. So as we're only using out-of-the-box Angular application code, I would say yes. But it needs to be tested out before we can move on to say a real yes on that. So that's one of my next steps to make sure that we can use the Angular CLI, as I think it's a great approach, and it's going to streamline the process a lot. Instead of copying and just creating your components all the time, it will just work pretty nicely. So that's pretty much what I had to show today. This is still work in progress. We're still working on that. I think now we should have a fairly good version 1, v1.0 that works on a lot of scenarios. Now I see that it actually doesn't work on the hosted workbench, but that's a first for me. So that's kind of very weird. I don't know why it's not working. I'll make sure that the code is working, and I'll let you know. If not, there's all documentation is available directly on the GitHub repo, so you can actually go in and start playing with that. That's it.
Fantastic. Could you paste the link to that repo into the chat window for everybody?
Absolutely.
And for
Absolutely.
me as well? Cool. So fantastic stuff. So thank you very much for that. We've got a little bit of time. I'm going to go ahead and take back over here. This is the part I can never quite. There we go. Present. So thanks to Sergei, thanks to Sebastian. Those are some really cool demos. I hope folks found that interesting. If you haven't checked out the configure method, please do that. And if you haven't checked out the Angular 4 stuff there, really cool capabilities. So very cool work from both guys, and great to see that. And of course, I know all of you are also doing very cool stuff. So if you'd like to demo it, please do get in touch and let us know. And we do have a little bit of time left for some open discussion. If folks have questions on either the demos from today or sort of general questions, we'll do our best to answer them. And if not, we can close up a little early today. I see we got one person typing. Oh, just saying thank you. Perfect. Cool. Well, I did want to say thank you, everybody, for joining the call. I did want to also apologize for canceling the one last week on very short notice, but now you all know why. So I think it makes a little bit more sense. But apologies for that on the short notice. Hate to do that. But great to see everybody back this week. And like I said, we'll keep the calls going now, should be without interruption. And we will get the rest of the SharePoint patterns and practices calls spun back up around the invites and whatnot. So if those haven't been updated, they will be, and we will get the monthly calls and the other special interest group calls invites updated, and those will be continuing on, of course. Thank you, Chris, for the congrats. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. It was a really great call, as always. Our next meeting will be August 17th. That's going to coincide probably about with the target I've got in my head for the August monthly release. So like I said, if you've got stuff you'd like to see in there, do please put together a pull request. Otherwise, we'll see as get to as many of the issues as we can in the list. So thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend, and we will talk soon. Take care. Bye.